Welcome everybody to the Gravity 9 Inside Digital webinar. I hope you've all been able to join without any problems. It's always tricky getting onto Zoom, but I think if nothing else, the last 6 to 8 weeks have all taught us to become experts in Zoom and to know exactly how to work our way around it and to get into these schools. So welcome. This is the first in a series of webinars that we have put together, looking at how organizations can develop new digital capabilities, products and services. And that's particularly relevant at the moment, as I guess there's going to be an increase in organizations looking to build digitally native services off the back of the current coronavirus pandemic. I'm very pleased to have an old friend of mine and a friend of Gravity 9's, Jim Duffy from Tracr. He's the CEO there, and they are part of De Beers. And Jim will talk to us a bit more about their story and their journey and how De Beers have been developing a new digital product in Tracr. And he will share that with us shortly. I'll then interview Jim, ask him a few questions, and then we'll open up to the floor for any other questions. So please do put questions in either the chat panel or the Q&A box, and we will seek to answer as many of those questions as we can during the presentation. There will also be a recording of this presentation made available afterwards. So we will share that with people, and it will be up on our website in due course. I also want to thank Jim for giving up his time to share his story and the experience of Tracr with us. I've known Jim, as I said, for a number of years. We've worked closely with him, and very excited to hear what he has to share with us. It's a fascinating journey and story, and we hope you'll find it useful and interesting and relevant to your own situations and organizations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jim and let him share the Tracr story with us. Jim, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thanks a lot for inviting us in to speak with everyone, and good morning, everybody. I've been through this cycle of creating new products and new platforms, especially a few times. I've created internet platforms in the mid-90s through to the early 90s. I've created government communication and security platforms. I worked in investment banking as the data and analytics lead for BNP Paribas for about a decade. I then worked for MongoDB, helping them win over some strategic clients, which is basically several transformations at once. We worked mostly in financial services, large government organizations, communications, pharma, etc. And now I find myself at Tracr, helping to transform and bring new digital utilities to what is a mining sector, really, the diamond mining sector. But you'll see the patterns that we've developed and the challenges that we've solved are widely applicable. You don't have to be a large diamond miner to find value from some of these lessons. Let me just share my screen quickly and make sure that I've got this here. So, oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Andy, can you see that screen?
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Great. Okay, well, so I want to talk a bit about our journey. What are the challenges? What are the lessons learned? And as Andy said, please send the questions over in the Q&A or the chat so we can field those. I want to talk a bit about our beginning and our purpose, because I think that's essential as a guiding star. A bit about the landscape. It's important to understand if we're going to go somewhere, what stands between us and our goal in terms of what we can use and what might slow us down, addressing the largest challenges, and also where we are today and then where we're going. And I think we can take the questions in from there. So let's start with the beginning. And you know, if anybody's a fan of Simon Sinek's Why, How, What, I recommend it if you don't know it. It's a short video on YouTube. We always got to start with the why and our purpose and how this thing began. So our purpose, just simply said, is to enhance trust in the diamond industry by assuring provenance, traceability, and authenticity throughout the entire value chain. You also see those two orange and brown blocks at the bottom. If you're not familiar, those are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, of which there's 17. Tracr maps to 9 and 12 most directly, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. and responsible consumption and production. Those 17 dimensions that we can all pay attention to will be a net better world if we all focus on that. I encourage you to have a look at them. So how did this begin? It was before my time. I've been at Tracr for about 2 years now. This started with thinking through some of the largest challenges in their supply chain and in their industry. Consistently assuring consumers of the quality and sustainable sourcing of the product that they're buying, but also thinking through some of the challenges that need to be solved to get that going. They were keenly aware of their challenges. De Beers has been at this, and the diamond industry has been at this for 130 plus, or even multiple centuries, depending on how you count it. So the problem space was well understood, but thinking through what might be the solutions of that, and especially what tools can enable the solutions, which we'll talk about in a second, took outside help. So at the time, De Beers used external consulting. That was a bit before my time, to help them think through the ideas of what might be the solution. Is it 3 things? Is it 1 thing used 3 ways, etc.? That process took a moment to get right, and just to make sure that they were properly solving the challenges at hand, which were basically a better observation of their value chain, and making sure that the consumer was well aware of all the things that De Beers and other diamond producers and manufacturers are doing in the industry. Like I said, I'm not from the industry. I'm most recently from a company called MongoDB, which is a database company. So I have no background in this industry, and I was surprised to see all of the different sustainability initiatives that are out there. For every hectare of land of mine site, there's over 4 hectares of preserved wildlife land. Schools, hospitals built, kilometers of road, infrastructure, all of these things that foster civilizations. Those are lesser known stories about that. So this is one of the challenges that we had to solve. So through that ideation process, De Beers came up with that external consultant to in fact solve this with what we'll call a Web3 or Internet of Value platform that helps connect up their industry and provides a utility to the diamond industry. It's a pure platform positioning here, and then the applications that come along with it. So with that, let me talk a little bit about the landscape so we understand where we are. And I'm going to do this very quickly because I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with this in terms of the evolution of industry and the pace of innovation. We started with mechanization. We harnessed steam. We could travel and manufacture to a much greater degree. We didn't have to pound iron with a hammer anymore. We had steam forges and these sorts of things, and we could build faster, bigger, better, and travel faster. That was the step jump of the time. Industry 2.0, mass production. Okay, so now we take these things and put them into a pipeline of manufacturing. The big innovation at the time was electricity. We could work past dark, that was the big innovation we don't think about anymore. The third is digital and automation. And now this is where we started to quantify time differently, computing. And this is where digital really came onto the scene. During my time at BNP Paribas, head of data and analytics, we were doing several 100,000 trades a second, rather than thinking about, okay, the clock bell tolls at 12, it's time for lunch. Time, we thought about it much differently. And because of it, we can make many more decisions within a span of time. I didn't have to think through things. We could allow the computer to offload some of the decisional processes and work for us. And that leads us to where we are today with Industry 4.0. Digital physical systems. Digital systems so mature that they loop back to the physical world. In Tracr's case, this is a connected value chain platform. If we have this pace of innovation going exponential, there has to be something that drives it. It's the internet. The first version was mass interconnectivity. Everything worked the same, but it worked a bit faster. Everything got an E on the front and a .com on the end. Email, e-commerce, .com, etc. The degrees of separation between us all stayed effectively the same. 6 degrees of separation, if you're familiar with that analogy of all people are connected through 6 discrete connections. I argue that in the second generation of the internet, networks of networks, so that's mobile networks and social networks working in perfect concert. the degree of separation comes down from 6 to 4, maybe even 3. And we see this on our LinkedIn profiles. You'll see the degrees of separation of your network there, and maybe all of humanity is more connected through Web 2. And now, through digital physical systems and Web 3, we can talk about the Internet of Value. And not only just having emails flying across the internet and I can click on something on Amazon, but we can consider assets to be digital assets. And that's a key component of how Tracr works. And it solves one of the step jump problems that De Beers needed to solve in the diamond industry. And really, I would argue all supply chains have to solve now. And we see strains in supply chains all over the place, the unprecedented public health crisis and what is a looming economic disaster of this COVID crisis is going to be largely summed up in terms of who was able to get resources from one point to the other point reliably. And Web3 platforms solve that. We have to think about some requirements about what we need to build. I would argue that these are the 3 requirements of everything: digitally, operationally, and economically sustainable. What are the tools we use, the digital? What are the processes that we use without breaking existing processes? And is it economically sustainable? Does the value outweigh the price? If it doesn't have all 3, you might find yourself in trouble. The kind of, if you think of the old project management adage, good, fast, cheap, choose 2, the product creator quote would be good, fast, cheap, get all 3 right. And that's when you know you have a killer app, is when you have something that from a tool set is digitally sustainable, from a process perspective, operationally sustainable, and then also comes in at the right value point, which is economically sustainable. So what are some of the challenges? The first and foremost, and it seemed tactical, but I think it's one of the most strategic topics of our time, is getting your data creation and acquisition strategy correct. New digital products require new data, at least some new data. If it's data you've had around for a really long time, you've probably exploited that that's the incremental steps that you've probably been taking for a very long time to create something. And there's value in that for sure. But the step jump value comes by what are the new pieces of data that we can create. And when I say acquire here, that could be the direct sense of acquiring data for money, or capturing data on a digital platform using basically the mechanics of how that works. So that doesn't have to be economic acquisition. It's just obtaining the data consistently and correctly. From a challenge space, what Tracr had to do, and it's back to the point of a digital asset, which in our case is a diamond. Each and every diamond is created as a digital asset, an operationally efficient digital asset. That's our new data source. That's what allows us to ultimately connect up an industry. And when I'm done with this short kind of overview, I'll show you our explainer video, which goes into it in greater detail. I'd like to show you kind of a blink and you'll miss it video, but I've got a screenshot after it. This is the birth of a diamond digital asset, right? You'll see something drop through the center, right? There it is, following through the middle. And I'll just play it one more time and we'll go forward, right? There's the diamond falling through the center of a robot that we created. So when we talk about new data and new, without introducing any operational burden, this is the birth of a digital asset, a diamond in free fall, getting its picture taken dozens of times. And it happens once every couple of seconds. So this puts 0 degree of separation between the Tracr platform and the data it requires, because these devices, these are basically Internet of Things devices that zap the data to our platform automatically. Allows us to create and acquire that data in a very consistent, reliable way. This allows us to ID that diamond and observe the diamond to such a degree that we can match it later on where it pops up in the world. And then to economic sustainability. So the economic model for Tracr is on utility pricing. And it had to be that because Tracr is not a commercial entity at the platform level. It's, we think of it like internet or water or electricity, or traceability is a utility for the diamond industry. When you turn on your faucet, you don't look at your stopwatch to understand what your water bill is going to be. When you're on your Wi-Fi, you don't cut a call short because the line charge is too high, which is what we used to do for long distance calls. I remember that, so maybe I date myself. But the economic model has to be a value-based model. The Tracr model is a utility pricing model. So now we've seen digital, operational, and economic challenges. Paying attention to all three of those simultaneously, that avoids many of the challenges of creating new digital products. And if you don't have, and you can't think through a product that you might want to create and what new data is coming from that, I think that the value might be in question for just, it certainly wouldn't be step jump value if there's not a lot of new data around. That gets us to the sort of fourth and largest type of challenge, which is education. Making sure that you don't fall into the best kept secret syndrome of creating your new product, whether that's for an internal audience. Maybe you're in a large bank and you need to create a platform. That's what I did at BNP. All of my customers there were internal customers. But there are customers all the same. The BNP Paribas community was enormous. And people needed to justify that they were spending time or relying on a certain service. And they needed to know how it worked, and they needed to make sure that it could be depended upon. What we've done in Tracr is a couple of things. We created a Tracr community. That's community.tracr.com. I'll put up a QR code at the end of this so you can have a glance at it. Everybody's welcome to watch our quarterly briefings. It's open to anyone in the world. It's not just the diamond industry. There's a lot of things out there that we're speaking about today that are highly recyclable for other initiatives. This helps us scale our presence. The number of people in the Tracr team it's a decent sized team, no complaints there, but we can't speak to everybody in the world. We need a scaling point, and getting our message out and thinking about those communication channels about how you're addressing from their own perspective a demographic, whether it's internal if you're in a large bank or if you're going out to market to court customers. It seems obvious, but I've seen it skipped so many times. That gets us to a point where it's better that my colleague Michelet explains by way of our overview video more about Tracr. And then I think from there we'll go into some questions. And I've got a few other slides I can use for a backdrop for that. So I'll stop talking and you can listen to this.
The Tracr Connected Industry Platform, connecting the diamond industry value chain. Our purpose is to enhance trust within the diamond industry by assuring provenance, traceability, and authenticity of natural diamonds. The diamond industry is faced with a number of challenges, and a more connected industry is needed to overcome these. Producers require more consistent ways to demonstrate their sustainability initiatives and inform the consumer about the good that diamonds do. In the midstream, there is slow-moving inventory, opaque demand, and challenges with obtaining financing. Downstream, jewelers and retailers have difficulty in consistently sourcing quality diamonds and conveying the artisanship story to their customers. Consumers have difficulty trusting that their diamond is authentic and has been sustainably sourced. Tracr is working collaboratively with the entire diamond industry and has successfully proven the ability to trace diamonds at industry scale. With our digital platform, producers are able to communicate country of origin, authenticity of the natural diamond, and tell their in-country impact stories. Manufacturers can objectively demonstrate and assure traceability, gain increased insight into their own inventory, and attract financing. Jewelers and retailers can enable next-generation consumers to make data-driven purchasing decisions, allowing the consumer to have complete trust in the provenance, traceability, and authenticity of their natural diamond. Tracr uses digital assets to connect the diamond value chain. Each physical diamond is represented by its digital asset counterpart on the Tracr platform. In version 1 of Tracr, we are ensuring individual stone traceability for diamonds above 4 grainers in the rough and above 30 points in the polished. Key data from the physical diamond, the cut, color, clarity, and carat, 3D scans and images are collected and then connected to the digital asset. The data is registered, identified, and automatically matched back to the original rough diamond. The digital asset is uniquely stored on the blockchain ledger, and the data and digital assets can be securely and privately transferred. The digital asset is created, assured by Tracr, and transferred to the next participant, objectively demonstrating traceability in order to connect the entire value chain. Tracr, using these digital assets, connects the diamond industry without interrupting or delaying current business processes. The Tracr digital process looks at two key checkpoints: a change in the diamond shape and a change in the ownership. The digital asset is created at the producer level, registering country of origin and the authenticity of the natural diamond. The diamond and the digital asset are then transferred to the manufacturer. Tracr keeps track of the digital asset along each step in the manufacturing process: planning, cutting, polishing, grading, and all steps in between, consistently adding data that is relevant to each step. When it comes to grading, Tracr has enabled third-party verification of a grading certificate, independently verified on a separate ledger. The diamond and its digital asset are transferred to the jeweler retailer, and Tracr continues to keep track of the digital asset at all steps in the downstream process. At the end of the process, we have a complete digital asset with country of origin, full traceability, and verified authenticity of the natural diamond. Retailers are able to tell data-rich stories to consumers. The Tracr Diamond ID and Verification Service assures provenance, traceability, and authenticity of the natural diamond. This is also an opportunity to share how local communities have benefited from the diamond industry's sustainable development initiatives. The Tracr Document Validation Service, digital grading certificates that are linked to the diamond digital asset. This gives the consumer complete assurance that all the information is authentic. Learn more about how you can get involved with the diamond industry's digital platform. Visit us at community.tracr.com for information on events, documentation, and to speak with the Tracr team.
Thanks for listening to that, everyone. A little repetitive from what we said before, but now you see the challenges that we faced along the way and how that maps into an overall B2B platform with a lot of consumer benefits. So maybe I'll go from here and leave it open to some questions from Andy and the group. And I've got a couple slides in here that I can use for backdrops of the responses to those questions, depending on what comes at us.
Great, thank you, Jim. We really appreciate that. Please do drop questions into the chat box or the Q&A section, and we'll seek to get through as many of those questions as we can. But just to start us off, Jim, I wonder if you could share a bit more about how De Beers initiated Tracr. I mean, you said De Beers are a 130-year-old organization. I guess we've all heard of De Beers, aware of their diamonds and stuff like that. But I wonder if you could just share how the actual sort of mechanics of it came about. Was it a bunch of guys sat around a mine, suddenly thought, you know, why don't we do this? Or how did they actually come up with the idea? Because it's a brave initiative for such a well-established, fairly traditional manufacturing or mining type organization.
Yeah, and thanks, Andy. This one is it's a real fascinating story, because you wouldn't think of diamond mining necessarily. I didn't at the beginning. I'm converted now to be innovative thinkers to this degree. But it was really the vision of De Beers and the CEO Bruce Cleaver to provide this kind of utility for the industry. De Beers has a long history of fostering innovation in the diamond industry. Sometimes it's come by way of sorting rocks from diamonds and doing that extremely efficiently. That's a challenge that's specifically in the mining space. And then, you know, directly to the question, it's now how do they speak directly to the consumer about all the good that they're doing and the sustainable practices that they have. That's when they you know, the way that I've put it before is, when we started Tracr, we were already sort of 10 years late and on the back foot to make sure that any kind of conflict materials were proven to not be in the diamond value chain. And that was one of the kind of the catalysts or genesis of this. But the prize is much bigger than that, because it's, you know, conflict materials. There's no even mention or talk of that in the current supply chain. It's more about how do we prove to the consumer the quality of what they have and the good they do. This took totally new step jump thinking. So they realized that that was a persistent problem, and we see this a lot in industry. There's persistent problems, and we try to use the tools that we've been using to solve new challenges. They recognized that they needed new tools and new experience to make this happen. That's where they engaged an external consultancy to help them think through the landscape, and, you know, some of the landscape we mentioned there in terms of Web3 technologies such as the Internet of Things, AI, distributed ledgers such as blockchain, and advanced security features, and how we can pull that together to a platform to solve this problem for the businesses along the value chain, but then also to give the consumer what they're looking for. After that step of thinking through and testing that idea with the industry, the decision was taken to run at it. And they created, with that consultancy, some sort of maquettes, little models or examples of how it could work. And they tested that with the market, as you do. And that came back positively. That was the solution. So that's where I stepped in to design and build the industry scale platform in August 2018. That led us directly to making sure that we can create and acquire the right kind of data, and make sure that we can create an effectively digitally, operationally, and economically sustainable platform, which is a utility for the diamond industry. That solves the root issue. It's important to mention that Tracr is an autonomous entity in this industry. We have our own offices, our own team. We recruit freely. The types of skills that are classifiably different than what a diamond miner has typically needed to run their business, or really the diamond industry as a whole. And we see this a lot with whether it's banking having innovation hubs or these sorts of things. That's the reason why militaries have special forces. Sometimes you need different tools and different training for the task at hand. So Tracr, in this paradigm, being autonomous is an important part of how we need to operate to achieve this, because large organizations, they've been around for 130 years, so they're at a different phase of maturity, and because of that, they move in different patterns. It's a different gear ratio is how I put it typically. And the gear ratio at Tracr, we need to move quick. We're shifting fast, but we need some ability to have a transmission to connect back to our mothership, make sure that we're operating efficiently. That's being autonomous is only the first part of it, and then making sure that we have that effective interface back to the industry, which works at a different pace, is also essential. We're doing it for them, and you can see on the screen here that, and what you saw in the video, that our process maps above their existing processes. We're not here to change the way that they work. We're just here to supplement that with new digital services.
Jim, just following on from that, I mean, De Beers and Tracr are obviously part of the broader Anglo-American organization. Many of us will share some of the challenges that working inside those large organizations have. How did that impact how Tracr was created and set up, so that you could avoid some of the challenges of the bureaucracy, the legacy technology, different cultures, particularly, looking at a very fast digital startup versus a well-established, mining organization? How did De Beers set Tracr up so that it be successful, even though you are part of one of the largest organizations in the world?
Yeah, exactly. So we're effectively considered an entity of the De Beers Group, which is 85% owned by Anglo. So two massive organizations, but not just the setup in terms of like legal entities and where we sit in terms of an office, around the corner, but really autonomy in terms of how we operate that venture, and it's set up such as a venture that can make decisions on a completely different cyclical rate than what is typically the planning of a large organization. When I talk about gear ratio, practically speaking, it comes down to making decisions really quickly, iterating fast, the more lean approach to research, development, testing these things with a market, and not what we would consider an order like waterfall approach, which is typically of a large organization, which is kind of get it done 100% in version 1 and it's ready. These kinds of platforms and the freedom to use whatever technologies we know with our experience is right to use to achieve our goals, operational autonomy, decision autonomy, being able to work at a different cyclical rate, all of these things are key parts to that success. And that's what De Beers and Anglo American has done to set us up in that venture style of organization, which has worked. Our platform is ready to launch after a short span of time, inventing new robots and covering a lot of ground.
Great, thank you, Jim. And then you've touched on the fact that Tracr is a platform for the diamond industry, which I think is very interesting, given that platforms are the holy grail of all technology organizations, and certainly tech investors are looking for the next big platform, very much following in the footsteps of Apple in the App Store and plenty of others who've come after them. How did the idea of creating a platform come about? Was that something that was there at the outset? Was that something that sort of they was just sort of realized it had to be part of it, but wasn't sort of focused on as a big thing? And then secondly, can you just talk a bit about how, De Beers are not the only player in the diamond industry, although they're one of the very largest participants. How does De Beers creating a platform that they want all of the industry to be on kind of work in practice? How's De Beers going to convince the rest of the industry to come onto a largely De Beers created platform? So yeah, if you just talk a bit about how the platform idea came about, and then how De Beers see that working with their competitors in the industry at large.
Sure. So it comes down to, and a platform, we often use that word. In this instance, it's a kind of utility platform, meaning it's a common service. It's a B2B platform in that sense. And the way it came about was because the nature of several challenges across the diamond industry was lack of B2B connectivity, lack of ability to share data consistently and correctly, lack of telling consistent stories to the consumer. And all of this came back to a single utility, which was missing, which is effectively a platform which helps connect things up. We could think of, the freshwater system or communications network of any city. It's the nature of those kinds of platforms to have civilizations arise around fresh water. That's an old paradigm. But now we see industries create digital civilizations around new, fresh forms of data and being able to freely distribute that and access it. In terms of how, and it's important to say that Tracr is for the diamond industry and by the diamond industry. And you saw in the video, we're working with all elements, not just De Beers. That's our mothership. But it's in their interest to be able to connect to their consumer, but it's in everyone's interest to tell the stories of a quality product that's sustainably sourced to their consumers. How they can all come together on a common platform is based on need, first and foremost. The requirement to have this kind of utility. It's not a nice to have. They've needed this sort of thing for quite a while, and I would argue that most supply chains do, and we've already seen several food and medicine supply chains buckle under the strain of what's happening in the world right now. But also how it's technically or digitally implemented in terms of using a decentralized platform. I don't want to go too deep into the tech, but there's basically three kinds of platforms: centralized, one place, controlled by one person; distributed, in many places, controlled by one person; decentralized is in many places, controlled by many people. And Tracr is a decentralized platform. Everybody has an instance of their platform. Think of it like your smart devices, your tablets, or your smartphone. I've got my iPhone, I have my iPad, Andy, you've got your iPhone, great, I can share data with you, it's real easy. I own the data in my device, you own the data in your device. I can't reach in yours to see stuff, you can't reach in mine, but we're on a common platform, a common network. So that's how we can all share these kinds of utilities together. And like you say, the holy grail of creating this kinds of platform is step jumps. And the kind of new tools that can get created from that over the value chain. We can solve fundamental problems. I can just kind of talk through a few of them in terms of even just business value by financial services powered by a connected value chain. I'll just leave this up on the screen so that it's in the recording, people can read through it later, but the types of applications and services that are built above this kind of communication network work on a different, more efficient order. If we just look at the example today, the internet is the only thing that's working well. You know, the only thing that hasn't really had any strain. Internet companies are doing quite well in this moment. And here we're using Zoom, which is something, it's an app built above a network, and it works really well. So it's the same sort of paradigm, but on a B2B level. Andy, are you there? I think you might be
Yeah,
on.
sorry. Thank you, Jim. I don't. You've mentioned blockchain a bit. Just as a side note, really, I wonder whether you'd be willing just to share your thoughts around blockchain more broadly. I mean, it's a huge issue. I mean, Tracer, have a very good use case for blockchain as you've outlined. But I don't know if you can just give your sort of broader thoughts on blockchain, where it's used well, where it's not used well. Yeah, because I know you've done a lot of thinking in this space.
Yeah, the reason why we always had ledgers, and okay, blockchain is a distributed ledger. We had ledgers to track assets. That's what that's our balance sheet. Liabilities and assets are in there, and we need to also understand what is in our current stock, what's on our current balance sheet or ledger, and what have we transferred out to someone else. By having a common way of ledgering businesses, not a common ledger in terms of everybody reads everybody else's business. That's kind of a misunderstanding of what blockchain is. But it comes down for supply chains, and I think a lot of businesses really get it right when they're deploying this kind of stuff, a distributed ledger to create digital assets of their businesses. And we see this at Tracer. There's two types of digital assets. There's diamonds, or the assets, but also documentation. And you can see it here in grading. We have a separate ledger. So we have a dual ledger strategy at Tracer, and we may even have a third in time, where we consider the material level, a digital asset, each and every diamond, and the documents that relate to those digital assets as a separate digital asset. Now we're able to solve fundamental problems by compounding types of digital assets. And the one on the screen here is a document digital asset, which is a grading certificate. You see an example of a grading cert on the left, and our digital representation of that, the digital asset, on the right. This is also linked to the material level digital asset on a ledger, on a blockchain ledger, which everyone, like I said, can share freely amongst themselves and transfer the diamond and the document along the chain. And you know for sure that this document relates to this diamond. It's practically impossible to swap or forge or to make any kind of errors. It's a self-auditing system, which is a big benefit and a lot of value of blockchain platforms, is that if they're done right, they should be self-auditing, self-settling systems. And we all know that auditing and compliance and regulation are challenges and a big time and cost sink for many businesses. With this kind of implementation, by nature of observing and respecting the traceability rules on Tracer, you're already observing the right audit process and stock management processes that are required.
Thanks, Jim. I just wonder, going back to the kind of Tracer story, with parents and grandparents like De Beers and Anglo American, and the very deep pockets they have, one can imagine that a lot of money and people were thrown at this. I mean, we've all seen big programs in large organizations, spending tens of millions and armies of people, put to these big programs. Can you just share a bit about the team that you have built at Tracer that are delivering this?
Yeah, sure. And the investment in Tracer has been an important one. It has to be in terms of achieving our full ambitions for wide sweeping industry transformation. the team that we've built is the team we have to have core skills to deliver on all elements of this. And you saw that in the video with how we're creating the digital asset. It's not just being able to create a robot, which is one skill set in terms of having IoT folks. We also have an analytics AI team that helps us match the diamonds using the data that we've collected. We have platform engineers that help us bring all of these different services together. There's commercial teams, as well as a design team that help us communicate these ideas to people. Those are what I would call like Web3 skill sets, or Internet of Value skill sets that are important to have. That's, if we build with anything like Web 2.0 skill sets, you might get there. It'll be incremental change, but somebody else will blow your doors off using the tools of our time. So the Tracr team is presently multiple tens of people. We're all based in London. We've got a few people down in Botswana, which is where our IoT devices are, and we're going to spread that out in a bit. But it's also important to leverage the skills and experience at our mothership, which is, Tracr can be a bit smaller in size because we're leveraging a lot of industry experience at De Beers, our mothership, and wider afield in the industry. Almost, there's only a couple diamond industry experts inside the Tracr team. And that's still been fine because we're as best we can properly leveraging the experience that's out there in the environment, which is key.
Thanks. And then I guess finally, what advice do you think you and the team at Tracr and De Beers have picked up along the way that would inform, if you were to do this again, or if other organizations were to embark on a similar kind of process to create new digital products or services, what are some of the bits of advice you would give, having been through this experience?
I would say to get your focus group of a small number of innovators and early adopters on board before the gun goes off. Make sure that alliance or association is set ahead of time, and everybody understands the sort of ambition of where things are going. If anybody's seen Crossing the Chasm, it's the 5 phases of market adoption. That's really 5 psychological levels of absorbency to new ideas. Innovators, early adopters, early, late majority, and laggards. The chasm is between the early adopters and the early majority. In the early phases of this, identify who your innovators are out there. Who's taking technology and just going with it? Who's looking at the innovators to understand, in terms of an early adopter, who's in the leadership position but has appetite to lead technically, and really work with them almost exclusively until you have a beachhead, so to speak. And then from there, you can get the rest of the market on board. If you go to your laggards and say, look, I've got this thing called a smartphone, and they're like, I've got a rotary and I can still talk on the phone, I don't know why I need a smartphone, you'll waste your time and energy and resources, and you'll probably flame out. If you identify those people who have appetite to go with you early on, you'll go farther faster, and then you'll, by definition, lead, and people will follow you along.
Great, thanks, Jim. We've had some really good questions come in, and we'll try and get through a few of these as well. The first question we've had is the benefit advantage that De Beers had in developing Tracr is that it effectively controls the formalized diamond industry. A challenge in other mining industries is that there are so many producers that consistency in one platform, such as Tracr, becomes more complicated. Would you agree to that statement?
I wouldn't agree with the assumption, and I wouldn't agree with the second part either. De Beers doesn't control the entire diamond industry. They're a very big player, and it is true that there's less actors in the diamond producing that, there's basically 20 large-ish diamond miners, but by no means does De Beers control anything. They often lead, but anyone big in any category leads. And then to the second part, if we take this kind of a platform to a more general analogy of like the phone system, and then eventually the internet that was built above it, and then the communication network that we're now using, which has nothing to do with phones. that touched every single type of business, and nobody was necessarily any bigger than another. It always has to originate from somebody who has enough resources and the willingness to has the experience, or the willingness to kind of bring in new experience, which is what they did at Tracr, to build a new type of platform. So if we think of how the internet was born, it was like a DARPA project. TCP/IP came out of the U.S. government. The World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, and collaborations there, and networks are born. The thing about a network is it requires at least two people. If anybody's interested, there's Metcalfe's law, and Metcalfe's law states that the value of a network increases with the number of participants on that network. And by building this type of network for the diamond industry, it's just even the architecture requires people to be on board. So it's made for everybody, so that in fact we can drive that kind of adoption. But by no way is anyone in the industry just has to listen to one major participant. They'll have their own ideas and they'll do their own thing. That being said, if we've got the right resources and experience, we can get off the blocks. But we've not done this on our own. We're working with 30 plus participants across the industry, and De Beers is only one out of that 30.
Great, thanks, Jim. We've got some other questions here as well. In terms of building a product and software development, what was the first steps you did to make the platform happen?
The first steps was to think through the nature of what it took to connect things. In this instance, it was identifying a diamond between the different entities. So here you see on the screen, producer, manufacturer, retailer. This is a simplified view, but it shows you the nature of the challenge. How do we, without marking it, without wrapping it in a package and stamping a QR code on it or something, but just looking at it, how do we transfer it to someone else and find it again? That led us directly to the kind of data we needed. Is it out there? Is it not out there? In the producer, there was some data, but not really. In the manufacturer, there was data. So if you see planning, cutting, polishing, they've been scanning these diamonds for decades to help through those parts of the process, but they weren't using the data for those purposes. So it was a hybrid approach. In the producer, we invented two different types of robots to not only create the data, but acquire it operationally efficiently. And then we harvested data through the midstream and the downstream to ensure that we can connect everything up. So it really came down to the nature of what it took to connect to an industry, which is the digital asset. How do we create it? Let's go find all that great data, make sure that we can connect everything up left to right. Now, can we do it operationally efficiently? Let's build some robots. Or really it came down, I say build robots, but really it was having the right IoT strategy is a general way to say that. And then making sure that we could viably secure this and have a common ledger for the industry. And proving those in that kind of order gave us increasing confidence that we could fulfill our ultimate goal.
Thanks, Jim. And then we've got a couple of questions around sustainability. What is done at the pre-digital stage to assure that the mining was aligned to sustainable development goals? How is that independently verified, and how is that evidenced in the digital ledger?
Yeah, sure. So this comes down to the best practice principles from De Beers, which are published, and also in terms of how the Diamond Producers Association accredits the diamond producers. There's better people to speak through the details on that, so I'll just kind of throw out those terms and people can do their own research. And then through the rest of the value chain, when diamonds go through manufacturing and jewelry retailer, it's the Responsible Jewelry Council who has their accreditation. All of these things are well established. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel on auditing mines. We don't know anything about that. We're a digital platform and application service provider, business service provider. So we rely on those long-standing processes. There's also a cross-border certification called the Kimberley Certificate, which monitors diamonds going across borders. That's nothing to do with us, and we're not trying to replace any of these things. We're just a B2B connectivity platform. I mentioned that we can attribute data, and you see it here on the screen, to a specific diamond, but we can also attribute data to many diamonds. So we imagine the best practice principle accreditation for a manufacturer has been achieved, and it's valid for a certain amount of time. Say it's January 2020 to December 2020, and a diamond traverses their entity, their legal entity, which the accreditation has been attributed to. Not only do you know that that diamond was sustainably sourced when it gets to the consumer, but you know which accreditation at what time was valid, was it up to date, etc. And all of these things are self-reinforcing. It goes back to attributing a digital asset of documentation. Here's a grading cert, but we can imagine any certificate in terms of sustainability claims or accreditations attached to the diamonds they belong to or the material they belong to.
Thanks. And then a sort of subsequent question on similar kind of topic. Do you go so far as to price in all externalities into the product, water usage, land usage, and rewilding, CO2 production, etc.? Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, sure. And just to answer that in a more general way, but it'll cover off the specifics about the land usage, and the rest of it is Tracr doesn't speak for anyone you see on the screen here. We don't speak for the producer, we don't speak for the manufacturer or the jeweler retailer. We don't really even speak to the customer necessarily. We've created a communications platform. The producer has their voice, manufacturer, jeweler, retailer has their voice to each other and the consumer. Because of the way we've created this platform, the producer can say whatever they want, whatever's accredited and true about those diamonds. Manufacturers, same things, jeweler, retailers, etc. So it comes down to maybe it's a specific marketing campaign for a luxury brand that wants to tell a story about carbon neutrality in mining, etc. Whatever the specific initiative is we can link those claims, which come down to their brand, to the material and help them consistently and assure that those stories are correct and true.
Thanks, Jim. Then one final question. Is there some resistance to digital due to the understanding home use of tech by the decision makers, or will digital push the dinosaurs off their ivory towers? Probably a bit harsh to call to be as a dinosaur, but I think the point that we all get the point.
Yeah, no, that's it. Is the leader going to continue to lead? Is IBM going to come up with a new innovation, or are they going to get kicked off? Is De Beers going to come up with a new innovation, or are they going to get kicked off? That's the nature of leadership positions, is that you better be ready to disrupt yourself is one way to put it. I would say, kind of transform your existing business model into something else. I think that, as I sit here, if De Beers does get kicked off their leadership position, which might be what they meant by ivory tower, but then we wouldn't have succeeded at Tracr. So I think that they will clearly pull through, and the way that they've done it leads us here after basically 18 months of heads down building a lot of things with a digital utility, which is in fact for the entire industry to benefit from. I'm optimistic. I think that I'm very optimistic. I see people now, they might not get what AI is important. They might not get what IoT stands for, but digital assets in terms of creating one and being able to reliably pass it around, that makes sense to people, and they leave it in the capable hands of people they've allowed to build this.
Great, Jim, thank you. We've basically come to the end of our time together. So on behalf of all of us, a huge thank you, Jim, for sharing the Tracr story with us and for sharing some of the lessons learned and insights and challenges that you and the team have faced on the journey. Thank you also to everyone else who's dialed in and joined us. Thank you for your questions. We hope you found it insightful and useful. Do check out the Gravity 9 website for some further events that are largely webinars at the moment. In the future, that's gravity9.co/events. Hopefully, once lockdown is over in various countries, we will be able to hold some of these events in person. So thank you for joining. Thank you, Jim, once again, and hopefully see you all sometime soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.